Did your vision of America shift after being forced to live in the incarceration camps?
Well, I have to say I was only 3 or 4 years old when I was in camp, and so no, I have no feelings or memories even of how it was in camp and after camp as far as the effects of being in camp on me. So I have to reflect on that in later years.
Well, actually, I was born in Topaz, Utah. I was the 5th baby born in Topaz. And my parents never spoke about their feelings about being in camp. I mean, that was just the way it was, I think, with the people who were in camp. It was such a traumatic experience that they didn't want to talk about it. It was like being a victim of rape. They did not want to talk about it. So I think most of us, third generation, South State, didn't hear of our parents' experiences. So I can't say that my vision, well, of course, when I was older, I realized that was really a terrible thing to happen, but otherwise, my dad went into the Army, he volunteered. He was in military intelligence service, and we like to say that the MIS, military intelligence service with the Japanese Americans, helped to win the war. We were told, we understand that it shortened the war by 3 years because the Japanese Americans were able to interpret like code. Well, actually, the Japanese in Japan didn't think any American understood Japanese. So that's why the Japanese Americans helped to win the war.
What was the question again?
How did your vision of America shift during the
Whenever you
incarceration?
allowed
At the
me, I put
time?
up with the Japanese,
Is it on?
and I know some Japanese. I went to school
Hi,
there, and I went through a lot with them.
I lived here in Tulare, and when we saw the people coming into the Tulare Fairgrounds, we wondered what was going on. Sorry. And we only lived a block from the fairgrounds at the time. So the kids, us kids, ran over there to see what was going on. And then my dad also noticed what was going on, so he came home and told us to go ahead and get everything all settled, put things away, because we're gonna have to leave. I mean, that was a very sad time. People cried. I mean, we cried because they didn't know when we were gonna come back, if we were gonna come back. So I'm very thankful that we're here today.
Thank you. My background is a little different, and my father was an aspiring law student, and so when we found out that we were gonna have to be moving, I asked right away, I had a new pet cat, I said, will we be back? And he was very adamant and said, we'll be back. We will return. So that was all I needed to do, and he said, consider this as an adventure. We're gonna pack up, we're gonna learn to do with less, but we will be back, and hopefully back to our farm here. And it's my belief that parents and grandparents can make children feel safe. And I felt safe during that time, and I have to say I was not afraid. My parents did not let us be afraid. I think they thought if we were afraid we might hold bitterness. They said we must never happen again, and we had lessons on that every day. We talked about courage, we talked about bravery, but they really felt that America would learn and we would be soon coming home. So that made my perspective a little different from some of the others. And they talked about everything with us. I was so fortunate. I was so lucky that they did that. So many of my friends, I talked with them about it because their parents too felt it was such a disgrace, such a dishonor to be put in a camp. And my parents have said, we study history because we learned by it. So that was their attitude.
So, I come to this as somebody whose grandparents went to camp, and so a very different perspective, of course. My grandfather was an Issei. He immigrated from Japan to the United States, but he was a fiercely patriotic American, and my grandmother was born in the United States, and so they had very different perspectives of what the incarceration meant to them. My grandfather never liked to talk about it, but the few times he did mention it in his life, I think he always tried to emphasize that America is a work in progress. It's a project that's never fully realized, and that the camp was a moment when I think it fell short of its ideals, and a moment that he, of course, was angered by at times, but he would often say that we shouldn't be angry. As many people who learned about camp growing up, second and third generation Japanese Americans, I was very angry when I learned about the history, about where my grandparents were sent to, and my uncle was born in camp, and my grandmother was pregnant with him. But my grandmother, she was not a bitter person, and I think that she believed that, as you said, the country could learn from these mistakes and from these sometimes terrible histories. And so that's something that I've tried to internalize, is their grace in thinking about this experience as something to grow from, despite the hardships and the pain and the trauma that they experienced through it.
I just want to add that when we were packing up and finally going, and we know that we really were leaving our home, my father took the time to drive my sister and me around our community, pointing to our neighbors and saying, these are not the people that want us to go to this camp. These are our friends. They're going to be here. They'll be here when we get back. And these are not the people that are making these decisions. So that kind of tells you what kind of a father my father was.
At least we knew that when we came back to Tulare, we would have a home. But most of the Japanese people didn't. They had to sell everything. But we were lucky that we had friends that would take care of our home. Thankful for that.
Just one more comment. Did my view of America change? Since my parents never talked about it, and they also did not show any resentment or hatred, it was not passed down to me. So I just learned about it actually in school and reading books, but they did not pass any resentment or hatred through to their children. And I actually commend them for that. I thank them for that. Because they were still proud to be Americans and they felt very fortunate to be living in the United States and having a good life after they got out of camp.
Right, I'm